So, the second match of the knockout stage has just concluded. Suning versus JDG is over, and we're right now going over the bans, more focusing about that instead of the games. You all have watched the games, you can watch highlights. I'm not going to show gameplay, we're just going over the bans to understand the matter and the draft errors and nuances here. Going into game 1, TF Lucian, Camille, Syndra, Nidalee. More standard bans, still very strange to see Lucian on blue side. But yeah, it is what it is. Graves first pick, just like every damn time. Again, there are many issues with this, because he is not good into AP jungler like Lilia. He doesn't have setup for his lanes. He's more or less a win more champion, because he doesn't really enable much but damage, and usually giving damage to laners is a better plan because they get more gold than a jungler ever will, even in this farm meta. So yeah, just a farm jungler is not that great, or a pure farm jungler, right? Unless he gets set up from his lanes, which is not picked yet. And with Syndra being banned, for example, or TF as well, he's lacking some core pieces here. Renekton and Lilia on the other side, a bread and butter comp. Renekton able to snowball for Lilia, and then Lilia do more late game damage. Also the AD AP thread combination. Renekton also a very easy tower diver with his point and click stun. GP Galio on the other side, getting some damage from GP, but no AP damage for Galio. More global ultimates, probably to enable Graves. Zoe lastly picked up in the first rotation, working quite well with Lilia, although they share both AP, 2 sleeps, and long range AP damage. Can be quite interesting. Also, both are very slippery. Caitlyn, Pantheon, Ashe, Ezreal pinching the AD carry pool, and in Pantheon a strong early game support who can warp the game in some cases. Jhin then picked up on the first pick afterwards, also complementing very well what I just mentioned in terms of his long range ability. Additionally, Jhin, Zoe, and Lilia, with their slows in comparison to their abilities, are also denying engage and are punishing low engage comps very heavily. We see MF and Bard, which is rather strange. Looking at Suning's champs, they still do lack hard engage, and Leona, Alistar, for example, are open for Galio. So yeah, they lack hard engage, and yeah, Bard ult is not hard engage. In many cases, unless there's follow up right or you hit 5-man Bard ults or some stuff like that, which is not reliable and not the way you prepare yourself. Yeah, and then Leona lastly picked up. Here they have engage and more frontlining with Renekton to enable their long range carries to deal the damage. Additionally, she's also working very well in jungle skirmishes, where champions like Zoe also excel. Suning, they have better scaling, but they have little means to come back after scaling into the late game, or then to enforce their late game powers on the other team. JDG on the other hand, they like early and mid game skirmishes, probably more in the jungle. Yeah, and they have multiple pick abilities, and will probably take the early lead in the game. And yeah, and with champions like Lilia, Zoe, as I said, they're so aversive, playing from far back, combining with Jhin, AD AP damage from long range, and their semi frontline. They had a very a rather easy to execute plan here, which worked wonders into the no initiation comp on the other side. So JDG is taking game 1. Going into the next game, switching sides obviously. On TF Lucian on blue side again. Nidalee, Syndra, Camille. Graves again first picked, not going to go over that again. Renekton, Lilia, okay, now the same but now on reverse sides. Zoe, Jhin, very heavy priority on these two champions as they're working very well together. Galio then picked up, probably like imagined helping the Lilia. Not really a fan of that. Both are heavy AP, and even Galio with his CC is also adding Merc trade value. Additionally, till Galio ult registers, Lilia is so squishy, she's usually dead till then. Bot Caitlyn, Cannon und Tam Kench are then banned. Nothing all too spectacular here. The Cannon pick into their Necton is a bit strange, but okay. Like he counters him, but with Lilia on their side, this should actually not work out that well. Anyway, first pick then in the second half is Misfortune. Again, strangely more priority on her in this series. She's in lane, she's okay against Jhin, but she can completely dominate him. Depending on the support matchup, yes, but in the 1-on-1, Jhin also has some wave clear with his Q and his long range and W into her being like rather immobile. It's actually quite concerning. Then we see GP and Leona on the other side. GP with his ult enabling more pickup and catch potential, enabling Leona to engage more profitable, also adding scaling to their team. Additionally, the slow from his ult, as I mentioned before, and the slow from his E's make engaging on their team way harder in a 5v5 scenario. Lastly, we see set support picked up with MF. Yeah, he's quite strong in early game and quite good into Leona and lane. Additionally, his team fighting setup can also work really well. He obviously can ult targets out of Misfortune's ult, but well, if they're more coordinated, then he won't do that, right? So Suning with pick potential, with some engage as well, some long range damage and scaling. A bit too much AD, but this sets up Zoe's damage even more because the enemy team is not emphasized to go into Merc trades, because they also don't overly rely on CC, right? Which would get Merc trades more value as well. JDG with some roundabout engage, but it's mostly running into Suning, which is hard in terrain heavy fights in the jungle, where Suning wants to play, right? With Zoe barrels from GP, Jhin traps, Jhin Ws, Jhin ults, and so on. They want to fight in the river and entrance of the jungle. They have wombo combo, don't scale that well. Also, Galio and Lilia, as I mentioned, not a good combo. In fact, it's really hurtful. As I said before, for the Merc threads, and the Galio are not being that good for this very squishy jungler. Even though you would think they have combat abilities with set Galio, but against Suning's long range comp, with all their stows, roots, it's very hard for JDG. It's very linear fighting style. So yeah, the team fights weren't that easy. In flanks, it would be quite different. But yeah, they don't really have that much flanking abilities besides the set, right? Additionally, in this game, Huan Feng started to heat up, right? He popped really off in this entire series. Moving into game 3, Camille Syndra Graves on Lucian Nidalee. Lucian now on red side band. This is what we want to see. Similarly, Ornn and Nidalee on that side as well. Good to see Graves banned, so we don't see him anymore. Really not a fan of this champion at the moment. Especially the way teams play around him, right? They play around him as if he's a Nidalee or something like that. But he's not the same. He needs a special setup in lanes. TF, then Jhin Kindred. Jhin Kindred, this doesn't really work all that well together in terms of their ultimate combinations and how much they emphasize AD, right? 2 AD carries in the same team, and with more probably to come. It's not that great for either of them. Lilia Ezreal, good poke and some pick with TF previously picked. Galio, which works decently with Kindred. Decently because, yeah, it's good. Everyone stands on her ult and he's knocking up the enemies. But also, you don't want your Kindred to ult in the enemy team fight, in the enemy team, where everyone is piling up against her. Yeah. Renekton Leona, mid-game bans against their scaling teamfight combo. Nothing all too spectacular. Jax Nautilus, banning a top and support, the position still left open, and a Jax ban indicating a Camille or Wooly pick. With Camille banned, yeah, it's probably a Wooly coming. Bart then picked up more AoE ults, but yeah, there are some interesting interactions here where they have to really be careful. Voli Pantheon, Voli as expect more or less through the Jax ban, and Pantheon a very strong early pick, complementing what Volibear excels as well. Lastly, we see another GP for Bin. His performance in game 2 was really strong, so to see him in game 3 on the same champion again with a similar team comp makes very much sense. JDG looking for picks, but not scaling all that well, have also limited ways to engage again, even though Suning has little frontlining. Again, their long range with slows, as well as the zoning this time from their ults, gives them enough space to deal damage with JDG. JDG now have flank potential and abilities to play around some vision spots where vision pockets, right, for a Pantheon stun or a TF flank with a gold card, which is something they didn't have in game 2 similar to a similar extent. So yeah, Suning, as I said, goes more for late game team fighting with some special ult interactions. They have to be careful, right, not to hinder their abilities. Yeah, they should also be very safe against JDG as mid-game engages, because their champions are not that bad in the 1v1 laning format as well. If Suning gets ahead early, JDG will be in a whole world of pain because of this potential perma siege. Additionally, little means to counteract or to punish Suning's mistakes easily, right? It is possible, right, if you have pick, but it's more difficult this way. Coming to the last game, we see Camille GP Syndra. GP, after the Bin's performance in these two games, it's quite understandable, and if they don't feel they have an answer to the pick. On Nidalee Lucian, yeah, standard, nothing has changed. And then Graves. Again, a bit too much priority on this jungler, but with both teams like seemingly unable to lose Lilia in the traditional sense, right, in the early game. In late game, Lilia works quite well in their team fights. They're able to use the champion good, but in the early game, Lilia is I mean, she's not that strong in the early game, don't get me wrong, but she's way too subtle in their place, right? We see from NA teams, we see some level 1 action, and in this series, Lilia was invisible until some team fights, so yeah. It's a bit understandable, the heavy Graves prior, and you also want AP mid, but still, the prior is like, it's first pick or ban, like, Graves is not that strong. So yeah, Zoe Jin, good to see both, very good combination, especially in this series where both team comps are not drafting for heavy engage, which can also be punished in the next series in the semifinals. But for now, the combo is very strong here in this series, with their meta of no engage and just like rolling a dice. If one comp gets ahead, the other has no chance. Anyway, so yeah, TF Renekton, yeah, standard combination, good for dives in the top lane. Kindred, Leona Bart, then banned, Caitlyn Aphelios banned. Yeah, nothing all too spectacular. I would like to add the Kindred with Jin and Zoe works a bit differently than you might expect. It's not a classical Kindred threat. It's more of a Kindred support, right? So if Kindred can keep one of these two from being one-shotted, everyone else in their team can like barrage the target with projectiles and snares and CC. So even if the enemy is standing on Kindred hold, he's probably rooted, slowed, or slipped. So Kindred has to play a bit more defensive here, especially she can step up to TF, Renekton, or Graves with the smoke screen. So yeah, Kindred, if played correctly here, can really work out. Leona Bard, Caitlyn Aphilus, I already mentioned that. Bard AD carry and support bands, with just Jin being elected in the AD carry position so far. Thresh then picked up, complementing the low mobility champions, also giving some pick potential. Nothing too great, but at least something, right? So if you get a pocket of vision, or if you have a vision advantage, which team comps with Zoe and Jin actually really need and want, the Thresh can also be very potent here. Especially not as the first line of engage, but hooking someone who is snared by Jin W. So for example, Ashe Blitzcrank. Blitzcrank working really well. Only Kindred has real mobility besides Thresh W. So yeah, Blitzcrank also a very game-changing pick. Just one hook, we all know it can change the outcome of the game. But for the bot lane and the crucial moments in the game, he's not all that good, because Jin, for example, is mostly out of Blitzcrank's hook range with most of his abilities. Similar story for Zoe. So yeah, I can see the idea, but it's not really doing what they want. They already kinda oofed with picking Renekton, because in the top lane you have better engage options than maybe what a support could offer. Ashe, similar story with her arrow. Her arrow can hit these targets, and then maybe a Blitzcrank can flash hook to close the gap. But here we have Ashe, TF, and Blitzcrank as their pick potential. What do all these picks combine, like have in common? It's all flashable because it's very linear, and also it's cleansable. So actually their engage is just firing a stun at the enemy team, and then hoping the enemy stunned and they can walk up to him and kill him. You might say this is very similar to what Suning has on the other side with Zoe and Jin, but that's not true because they damage from far away. JDG stuns from far away, then moves closer, then damages, which is very different. And lastly, we see a Volibear pick. Volibear into Renekton, a counter matchup as old as 2 months, as such. Nothing too surprisingly here. Also, very glad they didn't pick like a carry counter, but elected the tanky version here, because even though they have a lot of range and could play from long distance, it's very hard to play without any frontline, and especially champions like Zoe and Jin and Kindred as well don't want and can't really face check gray areas in the map, so needing a tank to do this in certain times is absolutely crucial to have a balanced team comp in pro play. So going over a bit more of the team cohesion, JDG has pick options, as I said, but they are all cleansable, flashable, and even, as I mentioned, if the Kindred positions correctly and not too aggressively, the Kindred R can also save these targets. So if they can't fight from darkness, right, using their projectiles with surprise elements, it's very hard for JDG. Suning on the other side they scale better, but have little consistent DPS damage. But good for them, their opponent has no backline threats, so they can use their damage whenever they can, and the enemy team has no tanks, which need DPS to be taken down. So yeah, in the series overall, so going over all 4 matches, if you haven't picked it up, the first one was JDG's victory, and then 3 victories for Suning with the same comp, with JDG lacking the ability to adapt and to punish the same comp being played 3 times. Yeah, Suning prioritizing champs like GP, Jin, later Zoe, instead of the usual bunch, because they were able to punish the lack of hard engage onto these immobile champions in JDG's comps, which were drafted repeatedly. The pick potential of JDG was good, especially in the last game, or like mostly in the last game. And it could have worked out if you watched the game. They had a 5k gold lead at some point, but misplaying at some points, and players like Huan Feng really stepping up to the plate, and on the other side, Dade award for Kanavi, right? They were able to lose their leads in moments, and then what's happening then? So when Suning gets back onto the map, there is less darkness for JDG's comp in the last game, more vision for Suning, which they can play around and make it really hard for JDG to do much onto them, right? If they have to really hard force run into them, Suning can just fire projectiles and move backwards and kite them out. There's no real hard engage besides some wacky flash plays, which are very unreliable. Obviously they can work out, and no one here is a robot, and Suning can make mistakes in their kiting and in their vision plays. There are always some X factors, right? But from the most consistent analysis point of view, it was really hard for JDG after they lost this one team fight and Suning got back on the map. And yeah, even though the gold lead was still in their favor, right? Suning didn't turn the 5k gold lead with one fight, but their comp was way better after the fight, just because they were able to get onto the map and didn't have to cower behind the turrets and have to fear every brush. So yeah, the games were rather short, and the play was overall rather fast, very skirmish heavy, as expected from an LPL Civil War. Although Suning played very good and drafted accordingly, it still leaves a sad taste in my mouth to see JDG play like this, losing in draft more or less 3 times in a row, and not adapting in any major form. And then the performance of the individual players, it wasn't like hard inting running it down, but it was a shadow of what they showed in their Down One Gaming victory or in their regular season. So yeah, I mean, yeah, Suning is also very, very good at the moment. This could also be a factor, but yeah, I feel like JDG is not playing up to their part. So yeah, Suning now moves into the next stage, into the semifinals, facing either TS or Fnatic there. On the other hand, JDG has to go home. I feel like they have to practice a bit more. They don't have to dissolve the team. Their roster is very strong, very, very good actually. Yeah, just keep it as it is, train more, and yeah, that should be it. Yeah, and that's also it for this video. Hope you all had some enjoyable moments here, and a great day overall. Here or tomorrow. Yeah, that's it. Bye.